And so, I got the opportunity to lead some work there very early on, 6 years into my career. That was my first startup in 2006. And then after that, I went back to J&J. But even within J&J, I was doing a lot of what I would call intrapreneurial roles, right? I was not a typical J&J. I didn't just start in marketing and stay in marketing. Or I didn't start in supply chain and stay in supply chain. I've done various different things. And as I was reflecting, we were all reflecting on our lives during the pandemic because we had time to reflect finally. And I realized that, I was always looking for the next future thing, even within a big company. And I wasn't acting like a big company person. And I was very happy. And so it continued. But I think I wanted more happiness and more satisfaction, and hence the move, and hence the
Excellent.
Pivot.
Excellent. Thank you so much, guys. That's Rachana for us. Thank you for asking those introduction questions. I'll go to the second lady on the panel, Rebecca. Rebecca, I saw your TED Talk, completely moved. All of those who are watching this or are live, please go and watch Rebecca's TED Talk. It's very, very moving. So Rebecca was a nurse. And there are nurses who will do their job, and there are nurses who will take care of their patients and they love their job. So Rebecca is the one who take care of their patients very well. And it became her passion. She was not a normal nurse. She was the first nurse who ever went on TED. And now she talks on Forbes. She was featured on Fortune companies and on Forbes as well, ABC News, a lot of media channels. And she started a non-profit organization, which is helping nurses become entrepreneurs, helping nurses in growing their business. And this non-profit organization also got the validation of United Nations in a very short span of time. So I want to ask Rebecca, how did you manage to get eyeballs of UN in such a small sort of period of time? So this is incredible marketing. And I know marketing and sales is the oxygen of any business. And how were you able to do this fantastic mass marketing for your nonprofit that you were recognized by UN so fast?
So thank you, one, for having me. And to Rachana, I think it's along what Rachana also said, is when you follow your passion, things happen. And for us, I think healthcare has always been a major topic in the United States, around the world, but in the United States, the topic never really included nurses at a global scale. Although we're the largest profession in all of healthcare, often the decision makers do not include nursing. So my experience, to your point, was I had started a company back in 2013. Hackathon changed my life. I'm sure you guys know in this space. That is what then led me to the TED Talk, which really elevated the voice of nursing to be heard, to say, we deal with all of the end users and all of the end product, but nobody designs product that works well for us. So nurses on average do 28 workarounds a shift, are in 36 different places an hour. They're innovating in highly inefficient environments, but it is burning out this workforce at huge levels. And if you gave nurses the chance to innovate, they could potentially solve the primary problems that they're seeing at the bedside and change the face of healthcare and human health with it and stabilize our profession. So how did we get the UN to recognize us? We just started talking on social. To me, LinkedIn has been one of the greatest platforms to amplify and elevate voices that would otherwise never be heard or seen, to engage with those who have the power to influence those who make the decisions. So one thing that I would say, if you're asking how you do this, I think the truth is nobody likes to be sold to. So if you're going to try to sell something to someone, nobody is going to respond. But if you provide them with education and insight and direction, the truth is they are going to learn to trust you and invest in you and see you in ways that you will never, ever accomplish if you try to sell someone. So what we did is we educated. We came out and said, here is the situation in nursing. We have over 5 million nurses in the United States. We have 19 million nurses in the world. But the truth is that we are burning them out at rates that do not sustain this profession. So as we began to educate, and we started to run hackathons. In fact, Rachana, our biggest partners were Microsoft and J&J, was the ones who sponsored. Johnson & Johnson in New Jersey hosted our first hackathon for nurses in physical presence in New Jersey in 2019. And we began to elevate this voice. Suddenly, everyone turned to us to start to validate at the United Nations, to work with countries who started to recognize that nursing workforces were going to be central to their support for their healthcare systems in the future, started to ask us, how can we stabilize those ones? The UN, we became an affiliate member through Congo, which allows us to meet with and help countries who are trying to build and stabilize their nursing workforce. in those kind of capacities. So what I would just say to you is that it's not about sales. It's about aligning people around a mission that they want to be involved in. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you start using your voice to provide good and insights and value, people are going to trust you and invite you in. And for me, what is slightly different is I've started some for-profit companies, exited those, but also starting nonprofits allowed you to reach people differently because it allows you to be trusted because you're not doing it for the sake of yourself. You're doing it for the sake of a cause. And when you try to change the world for the betterment of the world, people are attracted to that kind of energy. And so that's what I would say for a lot of people out there. Start volunteering, start showing up at organizations that are making a difference, and your whole world will change when you start paying out that positive energy.
Superb, superb. With so much knowledge and wisdom, Rebecca, I'm sure you have some mentors and wisdoms and coaches. So who's the biggest mentor and coach?
In my life, I would say there was one individual, his name was, there was two actually. So Chris Ford, he is now the founder of American Renal Dialysis Clinics. He started and supported me in my first company through Northeastern. That's one of the largest dialysis centers in the world. And he saw something in me from a very early time to invest in me to say, your ideas around nurse innovation helped me establish the first nurse innovation program at Northeastern University in the country. And his backing allowed for that program to found that first initiative in the United States. The next, I can honestly say, was Linda Benton at Johnson & Johnson. Linda Benton is the head of global affairs for nursing in the world. And what happened is when we started to talk about nurse innovation, Johnson & Johnson, we ran our first hackathon for nurses in the world in 2016. We received a phone call from J&J in 2017 in which they invited us to fly to their headquarters. And over 15 years, they had run a campaign. They had always invested in nursing, recognizing value nursing had in healthcare. And they had run a campaign for 15 years of thanking nurses for being nurses. And they recognized that that campaign was failing. We were losing more nurses than ever at the bedside, and just thanking a nurse felt like empty platitudes to a profession who was so worth so much more. So after experiencing our hackathons, Johnson & Johnson pivoted their 15-year campaign of thanking nurses to the future of nurse innovation as the central point of their healthcare mantra going forward. And if it hadn't been for Linda in the last 6 years, the David and the Goliath story probably would never have happened, and it has elevated nurses to an international platform to drive that forward. So two, the first to believe in you when you were a founding healthcare startup person, which I was, to the person then that elevated the entire initiative Nurse Innovation to a global audience who otherwise would never have heard it.
Excellent. This is brilliant. Thank you so much. If you're going to follow your passion, you're going to see the way very, very clearly. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for being a fabulous nurse and also helping nurses and helping in the healthcare space. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining the panel as well. Over to Jonathan Berendt, also popularly known as JB. So JB has been a sales guy since beginning. He has been selling a lot of stuff in Oracle. He was doing $50 million in sales for a business in Oracle. Then he went on to Google again. He was taking care of the clients in the ad world and was selling a lot of stuff. And gradually, he became a guy obsessed with sleep and brain. What happened, JB, Jonathan, that you became from sales to sleep and brain? What was the shift in your brain?
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate being here, and it was great to hear both Rachna and Rebecca. I think those were great voices and a lot to pick up on. One thing I'll pick up on that Rachna said was follow your dreams. So for me, that was almost a literal. So when I was 18, I had a dream where a famous quarterback, maybe some people remember Joe Montana, in the dream, he said, "Go west, young man." And so I was looking at schools in Indiana, where I was from, and Penn was actively recruiting me to run track. But Stanford was west, and I ultimately followed that dream out west, and in part because there was a dream researcher there named Stephen LaBerge, and I got to know him when I was 18. He taught me this very fascinating space of lucid dreaming, where you could become conscious in your dreams, and it was a fantastic way to explore consciousness. And so I ended up not studying it academically, but it was always a passion, if you will. I think maybe I was very pragmatic. And so I had heard that if you want to become a leader of your own company, you have to choose a kind of stovepipe to go up. And I'd heard that sales was a good stovepipe because you're ultimately got to be responsible for revenue at some point if you want to lead a company. So I went the sales path. But fortunately at Google, I had the opportunity to pitch kind of a crazy idea. And, honestly, it was that connection with Stephen from when I was 18 to, 20 plus years later that he gave me a paper and he said, look, this is really interesting science. Somebody ought to build a product. You ought to see if Google wants to build a product in that space. So I tipped my hat to him. I, pitched this crazy idea and then, everything changed. It's been a wild journey to really, pivot from sales and product management to really leading a very technical team and very deep in neuroscience here at NextSense.
Superb, wonderful. You're also part of the company called X, which is a company in the Alphabet group, which is solving very hard problems you mentioned. And in one of your papers and talk, Jonathan, I was reading that you can talk to people. You mentioned that you can talk to people who are sleeping and are in their dreams. Mm-hmm. That basically means Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie Inception was not wrong. So tell us more about it. How can you talk to people who are sleeping out in dreams?
Yeah, no, it is kind of crazy. So at X, I started working with a researcher named Ken Paller. He was at Northwestern University, and I was telling him about sort of the background in lucid dreams and that you can really bring a cue of some sort of external cue into a dream. And in fact, there were some devices that were using flashing lights, to get it in. But I told Ken, I think that you can actually get audio in as well. And he said, well, let's try it. So he hooked me up to an EEG and had a grad student scoring my sleep while I was sleeping. And then they said, we want to play some tones. And if you hear those tones, I want you to move your eyes left, right, left, right. That'll be like the signal that you hear the tones. And so, of course, it was a little stressful. And I thought, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to fall asleep. Like this was sort of a nap, during the day. And in fact, I was, just lying in the dark room and, losing, a little bit of track of time, but like, I don't think I'm falling asleep. And then I heard the tones. And so I signaled left, right, left, right. And I thought, oh no, I'm not asleep. And so, about what felt like 20 minutes later, they opened the door and I thought, boy, this is a bust. I couldn't fall asleep. I've been here 20 minutes and I heard some tones, but, and they said, great job. I said, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, when you were in REM, we did the tones. I was like, really? And I said, yeah, I was asleep. It's like, yeah, you've been in there an hour and a half. I was like, an hour and a half. So I actually did fall asleep. I was lucid, but it was, the brain actually, they now know goes into sort of local sleep. And so, parts of the brain shut down, and in a lucid dream, parts stay active, especially the part that has sort of self-recognition and self-awareness. And so that was the beginning of it. Then actually many labs ended up replicating. We published in Cell Biology. There was, several different media clips because it is kind of wild. So the actual experiment, it wasn't just tones. They actually did math questions. And so, 2 + 2, 6 - 4, and then you would respond with eye movements. And so there was sort of a prearranged, communication signal, because when you're even in a dream, you have the ability to control your eyes. And so that is one of the ways to communicate. And again, that's what Stephen LaBerge sort of pioneered in the 80s, that's the gold standard for knowing you're actually in a dream, that, sleep scientists can recognize when somebody's asleep, and sleep scientists can agree they're in REM. And so if those two things are true, and then somebody does a deliberate eye movement, that they actually were dreaming and they just communicated to you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. This is awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for answering the intro questions. I'll go to our next speaker, Prakash. Prakash is basically from India, did his education from India and is a serial entrepreneur as well. He now runs an accelerator that helps startups grow very fast. And he also offers them mentorship programs and advise them in their journey. He also holds an MBA and a Bachelor of Engineering and Mechanical Engineering. And Prakash was working in India in ISRO. And ISRO is the organization which launched Chandrayaan-3 that went on to moon about a few days back. Prakash, do you feel that you could have been there? If you don't have left ISRO, you would have been the one launching it?
Yes,
And any regrets?
Yes, that is one of the regrets. But the challenges come in life, and you need to handle it. And during that process, there are a lot of trajectory changes happen. And I have a regret that I left that job 20 plus years ago. But that's life. You go through the journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. So tell us about your cohort. So when you admit startups in your cohort, in your accelerator, what's more important for you, the team or the product?
Obviously the team. We put more emphasis on the team and team construct. We try to avoid the solo founders until unless there is a specificity that we are looking for, and we can help them with the co-founder. But we want to kind of look into the how long these co-founders they know each other, whether they have delivered anything in the past. Most of the time, these co-founders happens to be the college mates. There are some kind of long-term relationships, and that kind of helps us to understand their dynamics, because most of the time the early stage, the startup failure happens because of the team dynamics, and they don't get along. They are only known for 3 to 6 months, and then priority changes. The CTO leaves the organization, the product suffers. So we look into those kind of aspects of the startup. Yeah.
So, Rebecca is continuously nodding her head when you said startups fight and founders fight, and the one person leaves. Yep. I'm divorced with this startup with this guy now. So tell us about this, Rebecca. You are mute, yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I had unmuted. So I coach a lot of startups. Same thing to Prakash. Everything is always rosy at the beginning. I'm sure Jonathan and Rachna can tell you the same. People get very excited. It's when the rubber starts to hit the road and things start to get difficult. And when money becomes involved, things get infinitely more complicated. And I think why I'm nodding to the team is absolutely critical. And so the truth is, to your point, putting a whole bunch of people together that have only known each other for 3 or 6 months is usually a recipe for disaster. And where I've always found the best entrepreneurs, right, are those who have experienced the problem firsthand and have developed a solution to come out of it, and you build the team around them. There's been, in the last few years, I don't know if you know this, in the United States, in 2019, there were 9,000 health tech companies. By the end of 2022, there were 16,000. Now, we saw $475 billion pumped into the healthcare industry in the United States during that time. And a lot of people, I would show up at the biggest healthcare conferences in the world, HLTH, ViVE. These are very fancy conferences in the United States around healthcare. And I would walk around and meet all of these people who had started companies, raised millions, and I could not figure out what was the problem they were solving. And I don't know about all of you who are on this call, but the biggest failure next to having a failing team is, what is the problem you are solving? And that, to me, has always been the disconnect when you drill down. The best investors know if you cannot clearly articulate the problem and the solution and actually validate that this is a problem for the industry at the micro level, because the truth is, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to solve congestive heart failure. Here's the entire TAM on the return on investment of that scope. And you're like, well, that's actually not a solution that's going to be adopted, because you're creating simply more work for the front line as opposed to actually treating the root problem. The reality is it doesn't work out. So I'm nodding because finding your founders is going to be a critical spot, but also being aware that sometimes working with an organization, I'm guessing like Prakash and Rachna, where they're going to bring in other people who have the skill sets that they see are going to be necessary to be able to scale this from 3 to 5 years, is going to be critical. And we see this happen all the time.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So taking cue from Rebecca's answer, I'm going to Rachna now. Rachna, do you think investing in health tech is like trying to diagnose a rare disease?
You are on mute.
Guys, what's happening? Can you please keep them on unmuted? Yeah.
Thank you for unmuting me. It's like diagnosis. Yes, I would say that. As Rebecca said, I'll go back to what Rebecca said. At the brand level, there are very well-recognized areas that need help, but you've got to get very granular when you start looking at what a startup is trying to do. and where they will create value within the healthcare value chain, right? And healthcare in US and in many other countries tends to be a little different than pure technology or aviation, because in healthcare, if insurance is not going to pay for something, right, it's very hard to take that idea off the ground and make it $1 billion industry. And a lot of times I see founders, when they transition from being in tech to in health tech, they make that mistake of not realizing what it takes to actually succeed in healthcare. And sometimes the best of products that have been launched with the best of intentions don't take off or not successful because either the surgeons can't use them, or it increases the time for a nurse to provide care to her patients, or it increases the time for a hospital administrator, right? And so the best of products don't fly. So it's like diagnostics with multiple layers, like an onion, where you have to keep peeling off the layers to really understand, okay, this product might be helping patients, but the key user is going to be a nurse and not a surgeon. Or it's going to be a hospital administrator and not a surgeon and not a nurse, right? And that level of understanding is very important. So if I come across founders and products that haven't done their due diligence, I get a little annoyed, because I'm like, really? In 2023, why would you not actually go ahead and talk to some people in these health systems and talk to patients as well? I recently signed on to invest in a company which is helping with lung cancer diagnosis and treatment, and helping with health equity in that area. And the reason I made that investment is because I kept asking these questions. It was like, but aren't you going to increase the workload for the nurses? And hospitals are already stretched thin. And there's like, no, we provide the nurse with the solution so that you're not stretching the health system. And they've taken care of like these minute details, but very important details. So I go in with a diagnostic lens, but my lens is very, very critical as an investor. And I don't mind asking the hard questions when I'm doing that.
Excellent. So since we're talking about product market fit and people solving problem, Jonathan has built a fabulous earpod which goes into your ear and tracks a lot of parameters in your body. Jonathan, nobody else could solve this before you. Why did you leave your cushy job and went to a startup to build a product which is going to change the world? And tell us more about this earpod as well.
Sure. So when I was at the Moonshot Factory, we were looking at biosensing. I had an intuition that as we think about sort of the future of computing, there would be this intersection of biology, technology, and the humanities. But I wasn't quite sure, how is it going to come together? There's been a lot of traditional focus when you're measuring brain waves on brain-computer interfaces, or BCI. So I looked at that. I went to all those conferences. We thought of sort of some novel ways to interact with the digital world, but in what at the time was anything but a serendipitous moment, I had a revelation. And so that happened when I was in a discussion with a Google executive about, sort of the right to privacy. I think that there's really an important topic that, in my world around cognitive liberty that Nita Farahani has been championing. And I was already kind of in that mindset. And so I was having this, somewhat heated discussion about this right to privacy. And though I didn't use that term, cognitive liberty, that's what I meant. Afterwards, I was debriefing with a partner and I said, I don't feel very good. And he's like, oh, look, it's the first discussion, it's fine. We'll go. And I'm like, no, physically, I don't feel well. And right then my Apple Watch sent me an alert. And I looked at it and it said, unusual heartbeat detected. So I did, a ECG monitoring with this watch, which is a class 2 device. And it said I was in atrial fibrillation. So 4 hours later, I was seeing Dr. Sung Chun, my cardiologist, who I hadn't seen for 15 years. And it's that awkward moment where he's like, good to see you, I think. And I said, is this thing accurate? And he said, unfortunately, it really is. And so he hooked me up and sure enough, I was in AFib. And a week later, he cardioverted me. And thanks to, that quick intervention and that, rapid cardioversion, I was able to get to stable rhythm because I had been stable for 15 years. I was diagnosed with atrial fibrillation at a very early age. And when the Apple Watch came out with a class 2 cleared algorithm, I bought 2, so I'm charging one and wearing one. So I'm constantly doing it. And that's when the aha moment was. And so that's when I went to Astro and I said, look, we have something that, could be, in the same way that I have an irregular heartbeat, and this is, a medical device for me, we could make a pair of earbuds. And for people that have irregular brain rhythms, otherwise known as seizures, otherwise known as epilepsy, we could really provide something, meaningful for them. And, it could look like a pair of earbuds. We don't have to have the stigma of being able to have like a medical device. And, I know that was important for me, to do that. And so that was really the beginning of it. And, fortunately, Stephen Levy heard about this, and he covered us in a Wired article last year and told, a little bit of this story. So if people want to hear that in a little bit more detail, they can go. But that really was the genesis, that I think there's this crossover. And then I really brought in all the background research I had done on the future of computing. And I thought, there's a new, kind of class of wearables that are coming, that, they're, biomedical wearables where, is this a consumer device or a medical device? It depends on who you ask. For me, this is a medical device, right? But for most people, it's a consumer device. And so that's what, we're building. We want to build something that you can do every day, functions with. You could listen to a podcast, or you could, do something like this. There are some really interesting consumer features that you can do around focus and attention and cognitive load, drowsiness, but you can also do some very medical relevant things, such as diagnosing sleep apnea and being able to help people sleep better. And, for those that have epilepsy, not only detect seizures, but, we signed a contract with UCB, the leading pharmaceutical in epilepsy drugs, to develop a forecasting algorithm. So, literally putting buds in and then being able to forecast probabilities, of future seizures. So to me, it's just a very, very exciting world. I feel very grateful that, Google has allowed me to take, the work that we did there, because that doesn't happen. That's very rare. And I think that is very cool that Google felt like it couldn't just sort of put this on the shelf inside of the 4 walls, but allowed me to take it out.
Super. How did you convince Google to do that for you?
Well, Astro's a good guy. And, I told him the story, of how, the watch, was very helpful. I think that was part of it. We created a novel way to spin out. It was sort of a shared risk model. I had to put my badge on the table. I had to leave, and all I had was a letter from Astro, basically saying, JB's a good guy. If he raises money, we'll inject the IP, at a fair valuation. And so then I went to Ascension Ventures, and, in the world of, startups, a lot of it is relationships, right? And so, Astro and Evo were connected to Matt Herman at Body Media, and then Matt Herman was at Ascension. And so Astro made that connection. And so then Matt ultimately put me in touch with who's our lead investor now, John Kelpler of Ascension Ventures. And so, there was sort of a circle of trust there. And I think they felt like, okay, well, let's give this a shot. Let's see if we can do something kind of novel, because there's actually a lot of really interesting projects at the Moonshot Factory that don't lend themselves to an alphabet company. And so I think X was proud to find a new way to be able to do that. And others have since, followed in this. It's sort of a lightweight spin out, if you will. And that, works well for Alphabet, and it certainly works well, for founders. And I think it, ultimately encourages, people at the Moonshot Factory to take risks because they see that story. And I recently posted a video on my LinkedIn feed that shows kind of a day in the life. And I made several versions of it. The one that's, on the public website, I thank investors and employees, but I did a special one just for Astro and X, and they liked it. And evidently it's going in their newsletter this month because they're proud of Next Sense.
Absolutely. So, I saw that video, and he was asking questions to his employees, and one of his employees is an ex-Apple, and Jonathan was interviewing her, and he asked her, what was different between Apple and here? She said, in Apple, you have unlimited resources to work on things. So taking that question to Prakash, startups have to work under constraints. They have limited resources, limiting relationships, limited money, limited people. What advice do you give to startups who have limited resources, but they got to be resourceful. So how do you make them resourceful, and how do you help them work with limited resources?
Well, so the one thing that we strongly recommend our founders is the focus. Focus on the core area value proposition, that because you have the limited resources. So the only way to optimize use of those resources are to focus on the core area where the founder has a problem insights, and that is very, very important. Otherwise, it is very easy to kind of go spread thin and lose that momentum. And being resourceful is another aspect of life. Is by nature, some people are resourceful, and in that context, I have a philosophy of collecting dots versus connecting dots. So in our life, we do collect a lot of dots. Whether it is a new qualification, new college, new relationship, new friendship, new job, or anything, new acquaintance, new city, but how do I connect them effectively? So at some point, you need to connect the collected dots effectively and collect the new dot in that path. That way you can be more resourceful in that context. So those are our philosophies: the nail it before you can scale it, and in terms of the optimization of resources, and being resourceful is the collect versus connecting dots.
This is a great wisdom. Thank you, Prakash. Prakash, one more thing. A lot of my clients have raised millions of dollars, but a lot of them have also become the employee of the investor. Now, their full-time job is to manage investor expectation and be on calls with them, and the investors have squeezed the juice out of them. And they're not entrepreneurs anymore. They're like employees of the investor now, and investors continuously squeezing them out. How to deal with this issue? How to resolve this issue? How to take care of it?
Well, it's not the managing investors' expectations. I think that may be a wrong path to start with. But if the founder has the self-drive and customer obsession, then that problem will not happen, because the revenue speaks everything. You have a continuous growth, sustainable growth revenue coming in from the customers, and the customers are happy, high NPS score. You do not need to deal with investors' conversation or manage expectations. Investors will be always happy to see that path. So I will not focus on managing investors' expectation, rather than use that energy to serve your customers well. Customer obsession should be the key focus.
Absolutely, absolutely. So since Rebecca was smiling while you were saying that, Rebecca, what's your take on that? So sometimes what happens is, sometimes a wrong investor marries a wrong founder. It's a wrong marriage, and here it's difficult to divorce as well.
So I think that Prakash gave excellent advice. If your revenues are going the right direction, your founder, your board is going to be fine with you. And so when they start getting involved is when they're not believing that you are managing the direction correctly. Am I on mute? Let me see. I don't think so. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great.
Good. Yeah.
So I think the reality is, what I would also say to startups, and this may be contra to where this is to try to run as long as you can without taking investor money until you have sales, if you can. And the reason being, and I think the market's changing this way, in all honesty. I think prior to this, there was a lot of money out there to be given. And I think now the market's changing, and you're going to have to show a track record, either being a very successful entrepreneur who's built something before, or you could be like Jonathan, who comes out of a space like X and the Moonshot Factory, that people are going to give you the value that you deserve for your organization. The truth is I think a lot of earlier stage investors right now are going to want to see that you've sold something before they're going to invest in you. Because if you can have one sale and they can see the value of that, you're going to be able to prove it. And there's a whole bunch of companies out there that are like, well, we're pre-revenue and we need to make heavy investments into technology. And what I'm going to say to you is you just need an MVP. And the truth is, even the best tech companies in the world today, much of what they do is still manual, right? If you're Google and Microsoft, you're not manual, right? But the truth is, the vast majority of every tech company I still speak with, when I pull back the levers, there is so much human capital to make that engine go. Now, this might all change with the invention of AI. And suddenly I was talking to one of the gentlemen over at Microsoft last night at an event that MIT was sort of involved with last night. And they said at Microsoft, 30% of the coding is being done by humans. 70% of their coding is now being done by AI. The world is about to change dramatically. So what I would say to you is that healthcare tech also may come down dramatically if they know that there's not human capital behind it because they recognize you've broken the code on AI. So the suggestion that I would have for you is don't invest in the resources to build this tech until you've been able to prove that somebody's willing to buy it, and then you hustle hard to make it happen. And then when you have that sale, you go to the investors because you've proven there's a revenue stream, and that is worth gold in today's market. But I'll turn it over to Rachna and Jonathan, because I think they're closer to this than I am. And at my own company, they've specifically, as we scaled to a company that got a $1.2 billion valuation in the last year, the reality is they hired a CEO and a president. The CEO managed the board, the president managed the day-to-day operations. So if you can get to that point, bravo. But we do know the demands are there, and eventually it will take more than one person to manage those relationships.
Yeah. Rachna, I had a question for you. On this topic, very topic of raising, you're raising a fund, and, obviously things were already difficult before the banking crisis, in March. It sort of created a frost. Has the generative AI, is it loosening capital? Do you see, things changing, this fall? There's sort of a limited window, before Thanksgiving, before things kind of shut down for a little while. So, yeah. For me at Next Sense and for everybody else that's, thinking about raising funds, is now a good time, or would you recommend just kind of keeping a low burn and trying to wait it out? And then if so, until when?
So I think there are two parts to this answer. One is looking at the broader economic climate, and the other is looking at the time of Gen AI, which is the time is now, and it's going to remain now for the next year or two, right? So if you look at the broader economic climate, if you're going to go and raise money right now, tech companies' valuations are depressed, right? So if you really believe in your technology, and I think your technology, JB, for example, is something that you absolutely believe in, right? If you could somehow survive at the pace that you want to survive and grow at without raising a lot of external funding, as an investor, I would love to invest right now because I can ask more equity for the same amount of money that I would put in 2 years ago, right? Maybe double the equity, if not double, at least 40% more, right? And so that's the economic valuation side. I would say if you could wait it out till January, all the signs are that post JP Morgan, things are going to pick up. That it's going to be JP Morgan, all the activity in healthcare is going to lead to people who've been sitting on dry powder to say, oh my God, I can't resist anymore. I'm drooling. I got to take part in these deals. And that's going to have a ripple effect. I do see that coming. The second is the Gen AI side. Now, on the investor circle side, I see two kinds of investors in Gen AI. One who truly understand the potential and know exactly where the tech has to be used to create value. And then there's a second set of investors like anybody else who've suddenly overnight become experts in generative AI and everything Gen AI. I would say if you can get to investors who truly understand the potential of the technology, and if you have something that leverages Gen AI truly, because I'm mentoring a couple of companies that are not in healthcare, they're industry agnostic, but they leverage Gen AI in a manner where they could really have a big impact across many, many industries. And if you can get to the right investors who understand the impact, then you'll be in good shape because some of the better investors aren't being very greedy as well. So you've got to avoid the greedy ones, the ones who actually don't truly understand the technology. If they have nobody on their board, if they're a big investor and nobody on the team is a Gen AI expert, then you've got to question that, right? And so I think my advice to startups and founders is be very picky in who you go to for money.
Yeah.
Because when the lens that I put in when I'm investing, even if I'm investing angel amounts of 20, 25K, is that I look for two things. When I look at the long term and try to evaluate if this relationship is going to work with the startup founder is, one, are they open to advice? Because if you're investing money in someone who's not open to advice, because tomorrow you may be in a position to open big doors for them, but if they don't listen to you, it's a waste of your money and your energy, right? At the same time, I don't want them to be clingy and too dependent. If I open a door for them, they should be able to go and run with it and make something out of it, right? Or at least give it their best shot and not have to come back to me for everything. I don't mind mentoring people, but if you're doing something substantial in healthcare, and if you can't take mentoring advice, assimilate it back and drive into a passion to do it something on your own, then why would I invest in you? So I look for that fine balance in founders where, yes, you should be open to advice, but I shouldn't be mentoring you 24/7. I don't have the time for that, and I don't want to do that. So that's the balance. And maybe that goes back to the original question that you asked, Amit.
Yeah, thank you. That is helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachna. And Jonathan, one question to you. What is the biggest problem you're facing in a business right now?
Question to me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the challenge when you build a platform is knowing where to first start. And so we have this brain health platform. I've mentioned seizures. I've mentioned sleep. We also acquired a company last year called Nisos. And if you Google Nisos and postpartum depression, you'll find a peer-reviewed article. If you Google Nisos and rheumatoid arthritis, FDA breakthrough, you'll find an announcement. So this company, unfortunately, was distressed last year, and we took advantage of that opportunity. And so now, we're faced with just a plethora of options, and it's almost the tyranny of choice, because we have our own technology that senses. And we now have this technology that stimulates. Now, it was very fortunate that we were able to take advantage of this. And so sometimes they say in the worst economic climates, great companies are born. I think it's because of opportunities like this, right? Talent pools become more available to startups, distressed assets. And so we always wanted to build a read-write platform, for the brain. And now we have all that technology. Surprisingly, we have a lot of IP, both in terms of patents, published patents, both in terms of hardware, clinical studies. I mean, the Nisos technology was deployed at 40 different clinical sites. I mean, Rebecca, you can appreciate that's a lot. That is a lot. And so now we sifted through all that, and we found one potential indication that looked really attractive: postpartum depression. And so, one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit and get, maybe some discussion going, and maybe it's a little bit controversial, but, is the FDA really ready to embrace electroceuticals? Is it really ready to embrace, a new frontier of medicine? And I was very inspired by Sally Adie's book, We Are Electric. Highly recommend that. The short version of that is, we've spent all this time on the genome. We need to focus on the electron. Every cell in our body has a voltage. There's a membrane voltage. And, researchers have shown by manipulating that voltage, you can do so many, things. And so we have this device that can be worn around the neck that can stimulate the inner ear, which gets connected to the vagus nerve. And so we met with the FDA yesterday, and this was after, months of prep. And I'll be honest, it's not clear that they're going to make this easy for us. And I understand their perspective, but I think the dialogue needs to be greater, because I told them, honestly, at the end of the meeting, I said, I don't know that we can afford to pursue this, given how many barriers you're putting up, even before we get to the pivotal trial. It's going to be hard enough to get investors to gamble on a pivotal trial, spend 10 or $15 million, not know what the results are going to be. But you're now telling me I need to do a pre-pivotal trial. I thought that's what Breakthrough was about. If you look at postpartum depression and Christina Giordani, you'll see that they already did that. 25 women showed real response on the Hamilton D17 depression score, and they granted Nisos, now NextSense, breakthrough designation in February 2022. Why is that not enough that we can now go to pivotal? And, Christina, by the way, is the PI for Sage's new drug that just got approved. So we have a real PI who really understands the space of postpartum depression. We have a device that was really designed well, but yet they're throwing up a barrier that I'm afraid, an investor is not going to say, yeah, let's do a pre-pivotal so we can then go spend $10 million. That's what the whole point of, that was. And it's disappointing because that's part of what attracted me to buy that company was like, look, they already have breakthrough for rheumatoid arthritis and postpartum depression. They already have a pivotal study designed. All we got to do is go to the FDA, get a blessing. And then I think, what investor wouldn't, sort of bless a pivotal trial? But this extra barrier just makes me think that maybe the FDA, isn't really thinking this from our perspective. They're used to pharma spending billions of dollars and being able to jump through all the hoops, hire all the regulatory consultants. But, startups can't do that. And you're limiting innovation if that's the perspective.
So, this is a very similar story that happened with my client as well. My client is called Unicoin. Unicoin is doing Bitcoins in India, is bringing Bitcoins in India. Now, Bitcoins were banned in India, and Unicoin's mission and vision was Bitcoins for billions. That's tagline, Bitcoin for billions, because India has billions of people. After Bitcoins were banned in India, Unicoin founder went to Supreme Court and got Bitcoins allowed in India. And now he is again fulfilling his vision and mission, not bringing Bitcoins to billions. I think this is the true test right now, Jonathan, which I'm sure you will pass. It just needs more perseverance. What do you think, Prakash, about this? Like, people are putting so much effort and time, and suddenly somebody comes and says, "No, it's not allowed. You can't launch it. There are regulations. There are government guidelines. There are FDA." How do you tackle the morale of the startups who are being crushed under such guidelines and laws?
Well, that's part of the game, right? So we look for the founder, whether they have the problem insight into this in terms of do they know all the regulatory aspects of it? And this is the way the investor takes the risk factor calculation in their mind that, okay, this is the pre-FDA approval stage company. I am taking it as part of my portfolio. I already know what is the what-if scenario is going to be. If it is not approved by FDA, how I'm going to lose all the investment, right? Because this is one way, kind of one gateway that can make or break those aspects. Also, based on their experience, they need to think about what is the probability of getting some certain approval or passing through that regulatory body. I come from a fintech background. My first startup was in fintech, and in US, the consumer lending is a big fintech hassle to deal with. There is a licensing agreement, that license maintenance, etc., everything. So as a founder, I had to educate myself on that. Obviously, I took a help from a law firm initially, but then in order to maintain that regulatory, otherwise the license will get canceled, I will lose my startup. So there is always a risk, and investors, they need to consider those risks into the factor. As a factor into the calculation that they do. And I think the founders needs to be gritty enough to not giving up or not giving up and pursue those. So it is always I call it as a friction, in a way, because of like analogy wise, because of the gravity, we build muscles. If there was no gravity, no matter how much weight you pull, your muscles will not be built. So because of these regulatory bodies, I think the founders, they build their entrepreneurship muscles well, and the investors, they also, so these frictions are needed. Sometimes it is unwanted, sometimes it is like says, for example, in a Bitcoin world, a lot of things are totally new, unknown. And I think the government is still, the regulatory bodies are still figuring it out. Same thing with the OpenAI or the AI innovation is happening. There is a consciousness is missing in the AI field, and people are talking about how to bring consciousness in the AI. So this is going to be, there will be a AI for Good initiative, or some kind of foundation will be popping up, and do some regulatory aspects around the AI, how to monitor and how to create use cases where AI can be used only for good.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Prakash. One question to Rachna on, since we have a panel on this. There are people asking, Rachna, when you invest money in startups, how important is IP for you?
Yeah, and thank you, Charles. I think Charles asked this question. It's a multi-billion-dollar question. I was going to say it's everything, but I would say it's like 80% of the consideration, right? Because I invest in the field of medtech and medical devices, right? Some of these devices take years to get to FDA approvals. It's multi-million-dollar clinical trials. And if you don't have an IP, anybody can go ahead and replicate your product. I mean, information gets out very quickly. It's very hard to keep things secure and safe and closed in an environment like today. So IP is very, very important. In fact, sometimes what investors will do is when they talk to a founder who's filed 3 or 4 really good IPs around the product, what we also advise them is to go and start filing IPs to block other players from getting close to your product in the future, because you need a runway of 8 to 10 years sometimes to be able to get to good amount of sales for you to make money and all of that, right? And in that context, having a really great IP lawyer is very, very important. I think a great IP lawyer can make or break your IP strategy. And it's money well spent. It's really something that should be part of your game. It's not an afterthought. If it is an afterthought, then it's a mistake, I think. Obviously, it changes by the field you're in, but in the field where I invest in healthcare, it's very, very critical. It's harder to do IP management for health tech platforms. It's easier to do it in devices, but it's not impossible.
Absolutely correct. So
I hope that answered Charles's question, but I would love to hear from the others on the panel as well on this.
Sure. So Jonathan has about 40, 50 patents on his technology. Jonathan, you have been a great fan of IP. Tell us more about it. How does IP help you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of why I was intrigued by this panel was, this very topic. And, while we have a lot of IP, I think I am seeking some wisdom. I'll share what my perspective, but I would love to hear from, Prakash on this and others to kind of weigh in. I think that, as I mentioned, we spun out from Google, so we have Google IP. And then soon after that, Heraeus, a medical company in Germany with billions in revenue, they saw that spin out and said, hey, we want to, help you as well. So they spun technology in, and then we bought Nisos. And so, that's, 3 different portfolio sets that had corporate attorneys writing very well-written patents, and then also lots of published patents. So one of the challenges, though, is really sorting through that. Every week I'm getting an email from our IP firm saying, okay, this one's now an examination. Here's the examiner reviewing these claims. What do you think? And it is challenging because, a lot of those engineers are, no longer at the company. So I find myself, spending my nights and weekends, going deep. And fortunately, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been able to, go very deep in the tech that I have. But it is hard to know how much I should spend, so I think that's a question. How much, should a company like NextSense be spending on IP to maintain, these patents? So again, numbers wise, we have about 8 granted in the US. I think that number is closer to 20 when you go international. And then, we have 30 plus that are just published that, again, every week seems like something is needing a new action on. So it is a little bit hard for me to know how will that ultimately be valued. A lot of them are defensive, honestly. And, for example, very helpful that Apple published their patent on ear EEG. And so I got lots of questions about that. Now, the good news is, we already have some patents there. And I had our patent attorney, I said, look, I want you to do an analysis of this patent and see which ones, we can cover. And the good news is we actually do cover a lot that was already published. So that's where it's like, okay, well, that's a good thing because, anybody that sees the Apple patent realizes ear EEG, this isn't just a Nexsense thing, or there's others. I'll be happy to mention competitors. iDune Technologies, is working on this. Emotive. I say competitors, but really they're partners. We're trying to establish a whole new field, and it's actually a really good thing, that Apple published that. But honestly, there's already a lot of IP in the space. The grandfather of ear EEG is a gentleman named Preben Kidmozet out of our house, and he's been putting on LinkedIn that ear EEG is going up into space, which is amazing. So I think that this is where it's a bit nuanced, right? I think on one hand, you can see I'm really grateful that we have some of these patents, and it allows us to be, sort of protected and perhaps make it a little bit more challenging, for the Apples of the world to enter in this space. But on the flip side, I'm always asking myself, my IP budget is easily the budget of like, a senior engineer. And so, I could hire a new engineer creating IP, or I could pay these IP attorneys to protect my IP. What should I do? So Prakash, I really liked your wisdom of friction. So I'm gonna pick on you because clearly, you've had a lot of different roles, and I think through different roles you get wisdom. And so I would love to hear your wisdom on this topic.
So in an early stage, until unless you are really working on a kind of rocket science based technologies in that era, we are not a great fan of IP filing because at a very early stage on a B2B SaaS or HaaS or whatever you can call it, IP is like an insurance. Do you need the insurance at this stage and fork out 20-30K to file a full patent, versus at an early stage just file a provisional patent and just deliver to the customer? Make sure you are not infringing the existing IPs. That's all it counts. And then you launch the product, serve your customers, get paid customers quick enough. That will serve well in the future. And then when you raise money, then you can file a full patent to just protect it. Because and probably Amit can clarify, in a IP world, IP is not about like protecting, it is more about ability to pursue. If somebody infringes, do you have the capacity to go after that person or that company and spend the legal dollars to recover the costs or recover the losses? If answer is no, then don't bother because rather than spend that money on the product and get to the customer, get the traction that way, making sure that you are not infringing existing IPs.
Yeah. So,
but Jonathan, in your case, probably there are some cases if you are competing with Apples of the world, then yeah, it makes sense to have one or two IPs protected.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, again, we're not, it's not rocket science, but it is pretty deep neuroscience. And so I think that I like what you said, and I agree in the early stage. I certainly think we're kind of an unusual case because we started with so much IP. And so I think maybe it's just, sort of the cost of doing business to to make sure that we protect it, or find, alternative, cheaper solutions, which, of course, Amit, I'm sure you'll be happy to tell me more about Photon after the session. But I have been, I've been happy with, the firms that we use for our IP. We separate our corporate counsel from our IP counsel. And one, kind of small synchronicity is, the company we purchased, isn't it funny how synchronicity happens? So I reached out to our IP counsel, who's been, filing IP for us as NextSense, which is reading the brain, which is EEG. And I said, hey, I found this company that is writing to the brain. They're stimulating to the brain. I want you to evaluate, their IP. Let's set a small little budget and let's, have you do that. And I said, maybe we can do like 3,000 to 5,000. He wrote back and he said, sorry, JB, I can't do that. And I was like, you turning down money? Like, did I not say enough? Like, what is it? He's like, no, I'm the IP counsel for that company. Like, what are the odds, right? So he had conflict of interest. So, but he said, but I can make an introduction to the board member who is selling the assets. And so, that was also where I had a little bit of confidence in buying that company, because my IP attorney had filed their IP. And so that sort of sped up the diligence process. So that was just kind of an odd synchronicity that happened in that world.
There are some other strategies I have seen people follow, like say, if you have a technology platform and you have the ability to productize it in a different ways, then people normally spin out the product company or the operational entity separate than the technology piece, and then do the intra-company licensing agreement. And then you fund the IP part through the various grants, and like NIH will have lots of different grants, and you try to get those grants and fund the IP aspect of the technology and in one track, and then productize it on the different track, so that these two are separate and have an inter-company licensing agreement to do that. So I have seen that sort of arrangement as well.
What is Rebecca's take on IP? So she's been mentoring and educating so many nurses start their venture, and she does so much of innovation for nurses. What's your take on IP, Rebecca?
Yeah, so when I started my first company, my father's an attorney, and he said, you're never going to have the money to defend on this, so focus on getting the product up and launched, and then the rest will happen. Jonathan, you're in a very different space. It was the best advice that I ever got. We sold the company before we had to deal with issues of IP. So what I can tell you, though, is what we were having this debate last night, is we realize policy and regulation is often the death of innovation, right? And so the challenge that you have is those who currently sit in the FDA or all these regulation bodies, they were educated 30, 50 years ago in a school of mindset that governs their way of thinking, still is very much in their way of thinking today. Now, there's a group of us that are growing in this space that are causing influence, discussing new discussions, and the world is changing. But I was recently at a meeting about policies and getting those to run for office, and some of the congressmen said, look, we all believe that change happens quickly. But the truth is, change in Congress in the United States that's considered fast takes 10 years. But the average change takes 40 or 60 years. And I think we have to understand that in the situation of regulations, it is going to take 40 to 60 years. Generational changes are going to have to happen to try to break through these things. During COVID, we saw the most rapid times of healthcare innovation ever to take root because everything was laxed. All the regulations were laxed across scale. And we finally saw changes happen rapidly in healthcare over the course of 2 or 3 years that would have previously taken 10, 12 years. The average length of an investor now investing in healthcare, they used to think it would be 5 years, similar to their return on investment from fintech. The reality is it went to 7 years. Now they're looking at 12 to 20 years on that return on investment. That is why healthcare is so risky, because the regulations that play in this space are substantially more complicated than almost any other vertical. So what I would say to you, again, early stage, you're going to be spending good money after what I consider is a bad investment in early stages. Unless you're doing something like what Jonathan is doing and you've spun out of that, my suggestion is use that money because you have a long game here. And the people that are going to win are those who don't run out of money. Otherwise, you're going to be exactly where Jonathan, you can either be the acquirer or the acquired. And the truth is you want to be that person that is driving those ultimate decisions. And it's going to be hard and painful, but you got to be prepared. Nothing happens fast. And you have to be in there for 5, 10, 15 years. And I think we all have been sold ideas that it happens much faster. And there are a couple exceptions that inspire all of us, but true success is going to come over time, not usually overnight.
And I just want to build on what Rebecca said, if I may. I mean, I've seen a lot of tech investors move into health tech. without the understanding that healthcare is a longer game. It's a game of patience. It really is. If you don't have the patience, if you're not playing 5 chess moves ahead, healthcare is not the right game to be in. So I've been in situations where, I'm talking about a company I've invested with another investor, and they're like, "What? It's year 2," and they're like, "What's the revenue?" And I'm like point blank looking at them thinking, what are you talking about? Like, we don't even talk about revenue 5 years into the game. What is this? And, I talk about market potential at that point. And then I realized, well, they're moving into health tech, but they really are true tech investors. And SaaS companies, pure play SaaS companies will have revenue in year 2, year 3, whatever it's going to be. So I think the IP question becomes very, very much relevant to the field you're in, the vertical, the industry you're in, and learn about your industry as a founder, and then make your decisions. And learn, if you're an investor, learn about the new industry you're about to enter, in terms of expectations and returns and revenues and all of that.
Yeah, because a lot of our clients in the health tech space, about 18 clients in the health tech space, they are leveraging IP not for stopping somebody, for suing somebody. They're leveraging IP for raising money. They're leveraging IP for marketing. They're leveraging IP for good connections. For example, some of our clients I have partnered with University of Stanford, University of New York, University of Johns Hopkins, because when you have IP, these universities open their IP to you. And then you jointly develop IP. So their IP is open to you, jointly develop IP. And then for the new patent, you are a patent holder and they also have name on the IP, which massively increases your credibility in front of the investors, in front of the clients, in front of the government as well. Someone is going to go and say, this is being a joint IP developed with Stanford University. The FDA will look at it differently. The investors will look at it differently. So leveraging IP for marketing and for investment is what our clients are doing. And that's what we should be doing. And therefore, we should not be spending a hand and a leg for an IP. So therefore, there are much efficient solutions of protecting IP as we do for our clients across the world. I'll get back to you on one-on-one with that. And I think we are running over time. Guys, thank you so much. I would like to give you one 30-minute session on IP, on your IP for free, your analysis, your reports for free, no charge. And because you guys came on this wonderful show and gave your wisdom, this wisdom will be used by a lot of founders to grow in life about IP, about how to raise money, about what challenges to solve, what kind of founders should you be meeting, what kind of investors should you be taking money from. All that is very important for their growth. And I'm truly thank you all, and sincere gratitude to all 4 of you for your lovely wisdom and again for your time as well. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you all. Jonathan, we should catch up over a coffee sometime. I want to know a lot about the dream and lucid dream. So
all right,
looks
very
like
good.
You have the wealth of knowledge around that space.
Yeah. Happy to. And it was great meeting all of you, Rebecca and Rakshana and Amit and Prakash. So hopefully we'll see you again soon sometime.
Sure.
We'll meet up. Thank you so much, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
One of the best panels I've been on in a while. Thank you so much. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you very much.